All right, everybody. Thanks for coming to the talk. We're talk about how to build a cost-effective application security practice. We figure it should be the perfect topic for all the lawyers who are here for this track. So, just going to introduce ourselves for a minute. The important thing about me is that I really like beer, I went to school at the University of Virginia. And being a poor college student, I couldn't afford any beer. So I had to pimp myself out for beer. And I wrote a bunch of books. The first book on application security, Building Secure Software. And that actually pays for some beer, but really the cheap stuff, not the good stuff that I really like. So, what did I do after that? I figured, trying to get more beer money, maybe I'll start a company. So started a .com to build security tools for finding vulnerabilities in software automatically. That should pay for plenty of beer if you do it right. But for us, kind of went the other direction. And needless to say, I didn't buy too much beer. So I became an InfoSec sellout and joined McAfee, where I am Vice President Chief Security Architect. Have our core technology like antivirus, the Site Advisor product, and one other thing is product security, which David Coffey manages. This is David Coffey. Oh, yeah. So McAfee actually pays for the good stuff. So, after the talk, if you want to, feel free to buy me a beer in the bar. I'm always up for it.
My name is David Coffey, and I actually think beer is for wimps, so I actually prefer whiskey. For a while, I was a security consultant, and I'm still actually trying to wash the slime of that industry off of me. And I joined McAfee to manage the product security team, and I manage all the security across the products on a global scale. McAfee and I work for John Viego.
All right, so I'm going to talk for a little while, and then David's going to talk. What we're going to do today is talk about product security in the average development organization, what the real considerations are. Most of the people who go product security are not software vendors. They're people working on. So we're going to try to take the real world approach problem in a healthy company. Is this mic cutting in and out? Can people hear me all right, though? Should I turn it off or leave it on? All right. All right. Does anybody have a beer? I'll take it. As long as it's not open already. Yeah. For some reason, that's... All right. It is off. Otherwise, you'd hear a lot of static. Okay. That should be better. Okay, thank you. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the best practices that good organizations tend to implement. And then at the end, we'll really focus on what are the most cost-effective things for a product security organization inside a large software development organization or a medium-sized software development organization or even a small software development organization should be doing. And we're going to focus on how you prove the value of what you're doing so that you can justify your existence. So the core problem is fundamentally that businesses are cheap. They're really stingy. You can convince them that yes, there's a big problem with insecure software, but should they really be spending money on it? And if you can't prove to them that it's worth spending money on it, guess what? They're not going to spend money on it unless they absolutely have to. So if you look at the drivers that what makes people, what twists their arm for spending money on product security, well, there aren't too many right now. Brand damage, okay, that works for a couple of people. It worked for Microsoft. It got them to spend about $2 billion, but over the course of maybe 4 years or so. But that's not something that very many companies have to worry about. I know one medium-sized publicly traded company that had a series of 15 security vulnerabilities or thereabouts against their products over a number of years, and none of their customers ever called, no press ever called. There was no impact to them. They kept putting out patches, kept sending releases to their customer base. Nobody seemed to care. Why should they spend money on it? They didn't want. They would never buy any tools. They would never do anything because they didn't think it was cost effective for them to do anything. All right. So sometimes customers ask for it these days, though. Particularly if you're selling to a government, they want to see some proof that your code has at least basic security diligence applied. And so that's an actual driver for a couple of people, but you're only going to spend the bare minimum to get over that hump. Now, a lot of people see compliance as a potential driver here. Not really yet, and David will talk more about that later. So in short, there's not much of a reason from the average business guy's perspective to spend money on this problem. And if you care about the problem, then you probably want to either confirm that, because sometimes it really is the best business decision, or you want to collect the evidence to prove that that's wrong and show that you can do a more cost-effective job. Otherwise, you're never going to make any progress whatsoever. Anyway, let me put myself back in the shoes of your typical application security expert. So I'm going to mimic my own what I would have said to you about 10 years ago, and what a lot of the people in the industry are saying today. All right. So first, the typical app security expert is a geek and does know a lot about the kinds of things that go wrong. They can certainly sell you on the fact that you've got problems, which you probably do have. Let's be honest. There are probably tons of security problems waiting to be found in your software. But that person probably doesn't understand your business. Even if they've been consulting for a long time, they understand what they do. They don't understand large software development shops. Few of them have ever been developers. Most of the best ones actually have never spent any time in a real software development organization. They have spent a lot of time writing code for their own edification, but it's they don't understand software development processes, they don't understand business processes, and they don't understand finance or risk or anything like that you would hope they would be able to do if they were going to come in and help you make a decision on what to do or what not to do, right? So they also don't usually understand enough about application security. We do a lot of comparing ourselves to outside vendors. If the government comes in and says we want to do an independent code audit, we get excited about that. We're happy to do it. David will talk about that more later. But when we compare the kinds of things that people are going to report against the kinds of things we're going to report, there are a lot of things that we worry about that no one seems to care about or know about. Cryptography is a great example. The average application security guy knows like 2 things out of 2,000, and that's about it. And there are usually huge gaping holes in an application that if the typical guy finds 100 things, there might be 100 things left to be found. All right, so these guys are also going to try to sell you on code reviews. They're not necessarily going to be able to prove that they're cost effective to you, but they're going to try to convince you that you need to get it done. And they're going to try to get you to fix all your major problems, even though, again, the question is it cost effective to fix these problems, or am I better off leaving them there? They don't try to help you answer that question. They'll point to the big ones and say, if you don't do these, somebody's going to find them and you're going to be in bad shape. Well, we're going to show you in a little while that somebody might occasionally find some, but it's tough to know which ones. And if there are hundreds of problems, which often is the case, you're not going to be able to afford to fix them all. You got to make a tough decision. The only way that you can fix a few and make sure you fix the right ones, or if if you know in advance which ones are going to get leaked out or something like that. So they also don't know how to prove the value of what you're doing tied to dollars. I've never seen a good security metrics program put in place in any software development organization. And I've never seen any other consultancy really give good guidance on how to measure what you're doing and prove value to the organization through any model, like not even an ROI model. So we'll give you, David later will give you some details on how to do that. Doesn't understand business process or accountability. Generally hasn't done the job on a large scale either. They work on one product at a time, don't understand the concerns of a large software organization with 1,500 people. They honestly don't know all the roles in a typical in a typical organization. So as David will talk about later, when we do vulnerability response, there are about 10 different functions that need to be involved, and the average application security consultant probably doesn't know that 5 of them even exist, or that they have anything to do with software development in any way, shape, or form. So, but all that aside, the question we have to ask is whether these guys make good recommendations or not. On average, should we be listening to them? And let's look at some of the things they're going to tell you. Well, prove to me that there's a problem, application security expert. All right, well, the trends are up and to the right. More and more vulnerabilities are being reported every year, and I say, so what? Who cares? That information is useless. People are more people are looking for bugs. More people are finding bugs. There's tons of legacy code that says nothing about whether I'm going to be, my customers are going to be affected. It doesn't say anything about whether it's going to cost me money. It doesn't even say whether I'm doing a good job with respect to the industry. It doesn't say that the industry is in trouble. It doesn't say anything. Totally useless information. It's just FUD. So what's the impact to your customers? So here's some data, for instance, that says pretty alarmingly in the last 12 months, a good 15% or so of IT security professionals couldn't even tell you whether they've had a security incident or not. Well, and they're primarily running your software, right? So again, all this says to me is that IT doesn't care much about security, and if your customer doesn't care about security, why should you? All right. So, all right. Well, then, how much does it cost to fix a bug? Well, there's plenty of software engineering literature that says fixing a security bug is pretty much the same as fixing a reliability bug, any kind of bug. If you fix it early in the development life cycle, it costs a heck of a lot less than if you have to fix it in the field, right? Seems obvious, therefore you should spend a lot of money to fix all your problems up front. Nobody buys that crap, come on. Right? So that might be true, but that's not going to prove it to me. Right? So this is, let's spend a second to look at what the real cost might be. Let's say I'm going to do the cheapest possible upfront design for security. This is a pretty conservative estimate for a pretty small product. All right, you're going to spend, about $55,000 on things like architecture, engineering, and quality assurance to make sure that you get it right up front with a greenfield project. And that's if it is a greenfield project. Most of the software in your organization's been there forever, and there's nothing that you can do about it but spend more money if you want to fix the design, because it's really pretty expensive to bolt it on after the fact. All right. So what about if we do nothing whatsoever except wait for the bugs to roll in, somebody to publicly disclose a software vulnerability, come to us and say, hey, here's a problem, and we're going to tell the world about it in a couple of months. What does it cost us then? It costs us about $10K per bug, maybe, and it's about average. So does this say that if we don't expect there to be more than 5 disclosures on our product, that we shouldn't do anything at all except be reactive? It's easy to argue. It's easy to argue from the business point of view, and this is if you really care about application security and you want to see your company improve and build a practice around it, you have to be able to show that this simple analysis is a little too simple. So clearly there are a few things that we're not considering here, such as the impact to revenue if the schedule gets slipped by adding all this additional design up front, which actually argues against doing any design work whatsoever. But then there's the brand damage as well on the other side of the coin that is very difficult to put a dollar amount on. And again, most companies won't put a high dollar amount on it except in their existing customer base. So anyway, another point here is that even if we do design up front, usually we're not going to get all the security bugs out because it's really challenging. Even with the best people in the world, security problems still get missed from time to time. And somebody might find them if you're a big enough target. If it's a important product at a big software vendor, people are going to spend a lot of money looking for the bugs, no matter how much money you spend trying to eradicate the bugs. They want to make you a target because it's going to boost their career. So, again, how much money is it really worth spending up front? Don't know. What's the expected cost? So here's some data. We've been tracking a lot of data for years about how many problems we find, how severe they are, so on and so forth. And these are averages for C and C++ code. If you audit 1 million lines of C or C++ code, you would expect to find about 50 vulnerabilities that we would term critical. And to us, critical, as you can see up there, is basically remote unauthenticated bugs. And, that's quite a lot of bugs. And then at other various levels, you're going to see basically that you're going to find almost 300 security problems per 1 million lines of C and C++ code. Those numbers are much lower for most other programming languages. They're about 1/5 of the size, generally, rough rule of thumb. But the interesting one from our perspective is the one at the bottom. Per 1 million lines of code, for a large software vendor that considers itself a target, how many security vulnerabilities are they going to expect to see per 1 million lines of code, lifetime? So far, the answer seems to be about 1 per 1 million lines of code. So if I've got 300 bugs per 1 million lines of code, and only one of those is going to be the target, do I have to get all 300 of them? Because, I can demonstrate to you pretty easily that you could remove 90% of those bugs and still field the same number of disclosures you would have fielded if you'd spent no money at all. So kind of the part of the key to doing this right is making sure you're finding the same kinds of things that the bad guys would be finding, leaving the stuff in the code that is bad but the bad guy isn't likely to have found is actually pretty good practice, all things considered. All right, so here's another thing that our application security expert is might point to. They said it's going to cost your company money and brand damage. I actually might measure brand damage based on the stock price when a vulnerability gets announced. What's that do to my stock price? You can see some data from a study done a couple years ago up here, but the answer honestly is it's a blip at best. It might take a dip on average of a half a cent, and then it goes right back up pretty quickly. It just takes a week or so to go back up, as if nothing ever happened. So, is the industry peddling FUD? Let's see how many people think the industry is peddling FUD right now. Excellent. And everybody else works in the application security space, is that right? All right. Good, good. So I think definitely, but not maliciously. I think people believe in the problem. They've got what they think is the right solution. They don't understand your business, and they're doing what they think is best. But it turns out that you should put a lot more thought into it rather than listening to the experts. I encourage you to be a free thinker. Okay? But just because people are out there selling FUD, that doesn't mean that it's cost effective to be reactive. There's a lot of evidence that will point to it being cost effective, but you got to dig a little deeper. And for some companies, the answer might be it's not. That's okay. So here's, at a high level, an overall strategy for building a good application security practice. The first thing you have to do are identify the costs involved with what you're doing anyway. It turns out that most development organizations have developers that know a little bit about security. They care about it. They do think about it during design. And that's money you're already spending on security that you didn't know, and you want to surface that because you want to take that budget and you want to do something effective with it. So, it behooves you to go out to the engineering organization and try to get an estimate of what's getting spent on security. How many hours do they spend per product dev cycle on looking for their problems or, doing architecture that has security involved. And the number can be kind of surprisingly high. There are also things that you're doing anyway, such as responding to the vulnerabilities that are coming in. If you're a big enough company, you are spending money on this, and the costs are kind of higher if you have it happen just kind of as issues come up and nobody owns that response than if you had somebody whose job it was to respond to it. So once you know what you're spending, you can look to spend that money more effectively. And then a cornerstone to a good application security program is measuring what you're doing so that you can prove that what you're doing is valuable and that you can do things with more that would provide more value to the company if you had the money to do so. So you want to justify any spending. And so with that, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. This is a philosophical question. A lot of people in the apps security space think that every developer should be a security expert. We think that security is a real challenging field, particularly when you get into even the simplest of crypto problems. It gets really difficult really quickly to understand what to do. It shouldn't be a developer's job. I mean, it's a full-time job for guys like us to understand the app security space. How can a developer be expected to keep up and really keep his code secure? The average developer should not be expected to be a security expert. We should be relying on a relatively few people that we try to impart with expertise and then let the average developer be a developer and provide him the tools to do his job with the proper controls in place to keep him from shooting the company's foot off. All right. Security is everybody's problem. It should be pretty obvious. David will talk a little bit more about this later. Now we're going to talk about what companies building application security practices, companies with good application security practices actually do. They break up into 7 different best practice areas that we're going to go into. The first one is awareness and training programs. So, the goal of a good training program is pretty obvious. You're trying to convince people there's a problem. You're trying to get developers to avoid the problem in the first place. The good thing about this is that most organizations have a training budget set aside for development, and so you can do security training on the cheap by actually leveraging the existing training budget. So if you're willing to sacrifice some other piece of training that, I'm not going to give you that C++, advanced C++ class this year because I'd rather you take a security class that's more valuable. That the training was already budgeted for. You just applied it to security and it didn't really cost you anything. So that's a big plus. Doing training well is really difficult, though. Most people don't. So Edgar Dale was pretty good at explaining why this is, and this is true for the way we learn in general. So he asked the question, how do we learn? You can see right here, we clearly learn best by actually doing. And training, the typical training, even this training that I'm doing today, really is up in the 50% retention range, where you're listening to what I say and you're looking at some slides, but you're not really getting to internalize anything I say. So, the complexity of security stuff makes this far worse. And, we've measured this somewhat, but I can say more anecdotally, the average security training, even when it's good people doing a good job giving the training, the retention rate goes something like this. About 60% of the developers don't give a damn about what you have to say. They aren't listening. They don't want to be there. They're just there because their boss made them show up, and they're not happy about it. Another 20% just really don't get it, but they probably want to. They get a little bit of it, but it's not important enough to their job. They don't feel like they need it day to day, and so they forget almost all of it. They might retain about 10% of it after no more than a month. So very, very quick loss of knowledge there. 10% already knew all the material, you were wasting your time, and then the other 10% are going to forget about half of it after about a year. So those are the people that are you're actually having a positive impact on. So just doing training is pretty challenging. You want to make sure to do a good job training. Because of this, and because of our philosophy that the average developer should be security aware, not a security expert, we actually don't like training that goes too deep. I think that people are less likely to retain things. You want to basically teach people about the tools that you're using in your organization. You want to teach them basic awareness, and you want them to know where to go for a problem. So beyond that, you want to be as hands-on as possible. Provide them recipes, provide them worksheets, provide them labs, but not for the complicated stuff. I mean, no one should ever have to, the average C and C++ developer doesn't really need to know how a buffer overflow is exploited, does he? I mean, I don't think it really helps them write better code, and if it does, some of them it will, but most of them it won't. And on the whole, it's not cost-effective in the slightest. So. All right, so you generally want to get someone who's a pretty dynamic, fun presenter. So do as I say, not as I do, and then find somebody who's a expert in the technologies your team use. There are a lot of people who are pretty well-rounded security experts, but they use a lot of JavaScript and they don't know anything about JavaScript vulnerabilities, or you're using struts and they don't know anything about struts, or it's just make sure the training is tailored to the tools your team are using. And make sure that you're actually measuring your success and the retention of the knowledge that gets imparted. So to make presentations more interesting, books that I did, so first, if you're really just trying to hit developers, say, here's the minimum you need to know, here's actionable guidance. We tried doing that with the 19 Deadly Sins of Software Security. That's a book that you can give to a developer with the expectation that they should never be a security expert. They just need to be minimally security aware. When they need to think about security, they do the least amount of work possible, open up the book, go down the checklist, and see if they did the right things or not. Right? That's the kind of thing you should be looking for the average developer. And for making your presentations interesting, books that I did not crack open whatsoever during the making of my part of this presentation, Tufte's Beautiful Evidence is a wonderful book that will teach you how to do a good job of presenting stuff without using PowerPoint whatsoever. PowerPoint is actually a horrible communication mechanism, which is why I use it. I really don't want you guys to learn anything today. I really don't. So then Tom Peters' Reimagine also people apparently find very helpful for putting together a presentation, but I wouldn't actually know. So the next best practice area is doing assessments and audits. A lot of people do this. You hear a few very popular things: threat modeling, which some people call architectural analysis, web penetration testing. So using tools like those that come from Watchfire, Spy Dynamics, and so on, and doing code security inspections, actually looking at the code to see if there are security problems. So let's look at these really briefly. Threat modeling, basically, usually what happens is you throw a bunch of people in a room and ask them to come up with good ideas on how they could break software. You basically say, hey, brainstorm. Most people do this without any process, no repeatability, and the results are about as good as the people who are in the room, which in most companies is not that great, but it's, okay. It's as good as the training you gave the developers, and once you take out everything they've forgotten about. So threat models are actually fairly expensive to build, but nowhere near as expensive as doing a full code review on something, because doing an architectural analysis is usually the first step of doing a code review anyway. So, but this stuff is a waste of time if you're not actually going to act on this stuff. And a lot of people come up with things that are only theoretical. They never follow through to see whether it could happen or not. They're just going to say, we assume that it doesn't. They just enjoy playing what-if games. And then another point here is that people will come up with a good threat model and then never track it as the software changes. But guess what? Software does change, and you can introduce new problems, and it happens all the time. So if you care about threat modeling, you better update it when you update your software. So these we would say are moderately effective. They work pretty well most of the time. They don't catch everything, certainly. There are a lot of things that you really can only catch in implementation, and usually people just aren't going to do it. You really that's very rare. So the cost effectiveness tends to be okay. If you go externally, it tends to be pretty expensive. If you can get it done internally, you can often find people who are really passionate about security. They want to do a good job, and they will help you do a threat model and still get their work done that you were expecting them to get done that week. You just don't put a time box around it. You don't put it in the schedule. You just give them a month or two, and something will come up that you can discuss. So it's actually not too hard to get people to do this job, and not really have to spend a dime to do it. And you just got to look for the champions. They're out there. You just got to cultivate them. So let's move on to analysis tools. Here's a blog entry from a year or a year and a half ago about somebody who took the Clockwork analysis tool and ran it against the Mozilla code base. And here's a response from the Mozilla developer. I'll summarize this discussion for you. Basically, there were 611 defects found in Mozilla, and 71 of them were determined to be vulnerabilities. Out of all of those, though, the Mozilla developers found that only 3 were bugs. So the question is, was that analysis tool then almost 100% useless? Certainly, it's going to take us a lot of time and energy to review about 700 results to try to figure out, what's real and what's not. Is that cost effective? Probably not. So, But web penetration testing tools, this is the most popular type of tool out there right now. Basically, if you've got an application that has a web component to it, it's a black box testing tool that will bang against it and try inputs that are meant to kind of elicit evidence of SQL injection, cross-site scripting, so on and so forth. These things don't really give the greatest results in general. I mean, they typically have large false positive rates, and they often miss a whole lot of real problems. There's just a lot that they can't test for, and that's another talk in and of itself. But you can expect that everybody is going to run this tool against your site, this kind of tool against your site. So this is actually, even though there's a huge hidden cost here, there's a lot to do with the results, because you're going to get spammed, but you have to do a lot of work because with those results, because you got to ask which ones are the problems, and then what do I do about those problems. So now you got to answer these questions. Where in the code does you said there's a problem when I put in this input. Where in the code does that problem manifest itself? What is the problem, and how do I fix it? And that's pretty challenging. There's a lot of cost associated with that the average that you got to count. All right, what about static analysis tools? Static analysis tools are definitely useful for finding security problems. They are capable of having very low false negative rates and very low false positive rates for most types of security problems. But in reality, they're very difficult to use. They really don't work for most environments, and it just requires experts to run them and use them effectively. All of the tools that are on the market today, I would rate to be pretty poor in terms of being cost effective for an organization. So that doesn't mean that you shouldn't use them. It just means that it tends not to be the most cost-effective thing to do. If you are doing audits anyway, if somebody says audit this product, then this actually does start becoming a very cost-effective way to reduce the amount of time it takes your developers to do the audit, if you can find something like a real static analysis tool that doesn't give you too many bogus results. If you use tools like the first couple of tools that the industry wrote, they're just grepping for problems, and you're going to get spammed again, right? I mean, you're going to see the spam machine. So what do we recommend so far as audits go? Well, I think that it really certainly is going to depend on your environment. We typically do threat modeling on a team-by-team basis at McAfee. It's not a requirement that we push down. Teams don't have to do threat modeling, and we don't like it to have a impact on the schedule. If they're going to do it, they want to do it, that's great, but we don't like to see it take up too much of the schedule. Then we'll have David's team review what the development team does, and they'll usually do their own threat model, but we don't go through the Microsoft process for threat modeling. Microsoft spends billions of dollars, and nobody wants to do that, right? So the average threat model coming out of Microsoft is dozens and dozens of pages, and that's just way too much work just to produce all the reams of dead trees. And so be smart about it. We think that the most appropriate thing for you to be doing for static analysis, we definitely like static analysis, but not in the way you would think. Like I said, we do use it for our own product security reviews, but it's really a minor part of our program. We only tend to use it on our highest priced jewels on any regular basis whatsoever. But what we do is we actually use those grep tools that I was deriding a couple of minutes ago, and we use that to enforce coding guidelines. We give our developers coding guidelines, and when they check code in, if it doesn't meet those coding guidelines, they'll get a nasty gram saying, here are basically you shouldn't have used a stir copy, you should have used this instead. And then it doesn't really matter if it was a problem or not. They just fix it, and those common things that everybody complains about and are easy to find tend to go away. Now, there's no way you're going to do that on a legacy code base of millions of lines of code. It just does not work at all. So we only do this kind of thing for new code that you check in. All right. So. Final thing I'm going to talk about in this best practice, and then I'm going to turn it over to David to go through the rest of the best practices, is when you do a code audit, when you decide because somebody told you to, or because you're trying to get ahead of the curve and see if you can get the ones that, because nobody ever cared about security on that product. It's something you acquired and you want to see how good it is or it isn't. There are a lot of reasons to do a code review, but you're never going to want to fix all the problems a code review that you find in a code review. So the obvious answer here is, you got to prioritize and only fix what makes sense to fix. Now, that to me means the stuff that's cost effective to fix, and often that's quite a few things if they're really easy fixes. But sometimes the fix is really challenging, or if you have so many fixes, the little things add up. And so for some companies, it means only the stuff that the bad guys would have found through black box testing, or through black box testing. Yeah. So. Here are some of the questions that we tend to ask, and we probably fix more stuff than the average company because we care a lot about the problem, being a security company ourselves with a big brand. But a lot of people ask these questions and come back and say, we don't want to fix any of these problems, and then the typical app security company will go off in a huff and not understand. Anyway.
QA. This is another best practice area where clearly communicating the coding guidelines, the secure coding guidelines, is one of the best things to do. You tell the developers exactly what you'll be looking for. You're empowering the developers to educate them as to what they're looking for in their code when they're doing their own code reviews within their teams. We provide a worksheet at the end of our coding standards to allow them a checklist to go through and examine what areas they have examined, what areas they can't examine, etc. As John mentioned, we used a simple grep tool in order to enforce this. There are some, obviously, in the coding standards you can't enforce through the grep, because it's just grep. But the ones that you can are automated and collected and tracked. You can also you integrate fuzz testing. Fuzzing is one of those things that is very cheap to do. It's very easy to throw together a good fuzz test mechanism, a good harness, throw it at your application, okay, and produce results. You're empowering the QA and the quality assurance and possibly the developer to do it on their desktop, to throw things at their own thing, to test the negative sets, right? Because your QA is going to go in, they're going to test the functionality. Yes, this functionality was added. Yes, it functions as designed. But it doesn't actually test what happens if something improper gets entered into the form, gets entered into the input, etc. That's what fuzzing will provide you, okay? Secure developing frameworks is one of those things that's out there. It's very easy to either build yourself or use already established frameworks that abstract away the unsafe, commonly made mistakes that developers do, okay? And of course, the Secure Programming Cookbook, which is an education filled with recipes of exactly what problems you're trying to solve and what's a good way to solve those, okay? You can also add the -GS for the compiler features, etc. Vulnerability response is another awareness area that most organizations need to be aware of. It's a process that people should be established, clearly communicate within the organization because it does touch all aspects of the organization. Okay? A lot of times there may be times where finders will give you a very limited time in order to investigate the fix, understand what's going on, develop a new problem, a new patch for that fix, QA that patch, try to make sure you're not integrating more problems than you're solving here, push that patch out to the customers and educate the customers. While you're doing all of this, you usually have to touch every other aspect within your company, legal, PR, development, tech support, because customers will call in with questions as to what's going on, what does this mean, where does it do, and am I secure or not? Okay? While doing all of this, though, you need to be very prepared for not having a finder play by the rules. There may be an occasional mistake, something may get disclosed, and if one finder finds the problem, another finder may, and not necessarily follow an ethical disclosure. So when you hear about something and you learn about something, always be prepared to go on an instant's notice, and that includes orchestrating everything along very tight-roped with all aspects of the company. Operational security is an awareness that allows people to integrate a tool that examines the setup and the configuration for commonly made mistakes that other people may do or customers may do that open themselves up to security risks. This isn't necessarily something a lot of people do. It's Microsoft does it exactly, and with it comes with a lot of overhead, complications, etc. Organization, privacy of the information being communicated back, exactly how it's operating. Compliance. This best practice is relatively recent. It's been established over the last couple of years. Some of them are laws like SOX and GLBA. Some of them are rules and guidelines and standards that need to be established. Dealing with SOX, SOX was established specifically for not allowing corruption within the companies. Okay, it is very long, very complicated, and you'll hear a lot of security practices talk about we help you be SOX compliant with application security, etc. These are all very, very vague laws, very rules. A lot of times they're very largely irrelevant specifically to the application security field. Okay. However, one that has come up that is new is the PCI standard. And the PCI standard for application security looks like a serious shark, but it's not. All right? If you look at the PCI standard, what does it say exactly? Right? It says that the code needs to be analyzed by organizations that specialize in application security. Right? What exactly does that mean? Does it mean that my mother can go out and buy a black box testing software like Watchfire, throw it at a website application, and all of a sudden be qualified to test for PCI compliance? Yes, it does. And some vendors do that. Okay, so security metrics. This is an awareness, this is an area that I actually believe is one of the best and the most important. It allows a security organization to actually show a return on investment. Okay, it is. It helps the security organization bypass that geek label that they often get when they go into security meetings. A lot of times you go into development meetings, you're often seen as a hindrance, you're often seen as a bottleneck, you don't want to get anything pushed through, etc. But providing metrics for what you're doing, the organization, and how it's increasing is a very good way to distill any and all of those myths. Okay? So, how cost-effective is application security within your organization? How easy is it to tell that? How would you go about starting to do this, right? Are you meeting compliance and regulations that an auditor has set up and is asking you in your application security perspective in your organization how you meet those? How do you quantify your results? Okay? A lot of ways you do this is you put together and you put in organizations and you establish goals of how you want to measure it. So some of the goals that we're going to show you today are goals that we found to be very important within McAfee and how we do this. Okay? So one of the goals is tracking the cost of disclosures and what happens when we disclose things. Okay? So we track when they come in, how long it takes us to fix, in what phase of the organization we fix those in, and overall cost. Okay? And I'll go over the audit sections in a little bit. So here is an example set. Okay, and these numbers, a little bit made up, but they still compute the same way. You have the vulnerability ID, And then you have how many days, man days, it costs in each stage, okay? So how long it took you to reply to the finder. You want to track how long it takes to reply to the finder because you want to be replying in a timely manner. You don't want a report to come in from a vulnerability, have it sit in somebody's inbox for a month, annoy the finder so that the finder goes and publishes a vulnerability on you just because he's annoyed, okay? Some finders actually follow the disclosure properly. If they send an email into you and it doesn't get bounced back, that qualifies as properly notifying you, and if they go ahead and they can publish within 60 days or 30 days or wherever they want to. Okay. Research, how many days it took in research, how many days it took in development, how many days it took in QA. Affecting the product is another aspect that is good to track because sometimes you have products that problems that affect multiple products, or it affects one product which is used in other multiple products. Okay, so in order tracking those, in order to get research on that, you understand when you can patch, how often patches need to be, which customers you need to notify, and how large the problem actually is. The cost next to it, they actually mesh very nicely with what John presented earlier with exactly what and how long and everything else, dealing with the greenfield example that he was using earlier. So as you can see from this, it is actually rather expensive. Sorry. Okay. This is an example of what happens when the finders come in and you're tracking it and you already have an auditing process already set up and established. Okay? So you want to be tracking which vulnerabilities have been reported, which ones have been found in audits, which ones haven't been found in audits, and you go and hunt down why. Now, this is also representative of, John mentioned earlier that when customers come in and they want to closely examine your product. Some customers will be very concerned about the security in their organization, security in their data center, security in their network and infrastructure. They will want to go out and hire a third-party auditor to look at and closely examine your source code. They might have an in-house organization that will look and examine your source code or product that way. And what you do, some people will actually shirk away from that. They don't want people examining their product for security vulnerabilities, but if you open it up and you confront, well, not necessarily confront them, you open talks up with them, you say, this is okay as long as it's under NDA, you properly protect yourself, right? It allows you and your security organization to get a pretty good report card for how you're doing in an organization, securing your products compared to what other people are looking at in your products. Okay? But the problem is it doesn't give you the broad feel for how things are, because sometimes you may end up with a situation where it may be very, very tight. You may actually have no bugs in the product. Okay? Which leads you to a spreadsheet that looks something like this. This is tracking vulnerabilities over the product lifecycle after it's been audited. The audited columns are in red. Okay? The green columns are the columns that have been fixed. And after that, you have which problems have been lost because of dead code, right? Which audits have been, when you audit, a lot of times when you audit sometimes you run across dead code, you find a security vulnerability in it, but it doesn't actually get compiled in, or if it is getting compiled in, it doesn't need to be, so that we log that as dead code. Okay. Which ones are under contestation between the security group, and which ones are not going to actually get fixed. And it's very important to record which ones aren't going to get fixed, because then you know what needs to happen next round, etc. Okay? Okay. So, how much are audits costing the organization, right? How are you doing within the organization? Is it cheaper to do in-house? Is it cheaper to outsource these types of things? Well, here's one slide that'll help you do this. This will give you good information like how much does it cost you to find every bug, right? This is how we track the auditors. The auditors are on the left, Johnny Appleseed, Peter Pan, and Grover. But what is this really telling you? Right? Which one is the best auditor up there? Seriously. Exactly. Why? Exactly. Even though he's the highest paid auditor on that list, right, he's still the best one out there. He can find more bugs cheaper than anybody else in less time. This is an example of what happens when the same source code gets audited by individual auditors in a different way. Right? You can quickly see which auditor is good, which auditor isn't that good, which auditor needs more help, which auditor needs to work as a lead auditor, which one needs to be partnered with somebody more senior. Okay? Showing the return of investment of training. Training developers, we talked about awareness training and bringing developers up to speed, making developers not security experts, but security aware. You're still losing developers for significant portions of days or weeks when they do this. It's very costly. But if you use those common, simple grep tools that we were talking about earlier, you end up looking at something like this. You can track how many issues that people have been adding into their source code base, how many times they're using string copy, or whatever violations you have within your coding guidelines, and you can track how that actually changes over time depending on the training that gets introduced. So, overall, right, this is the main goal. The main goal here is to empower you to examine where your costs are and how good you're doing it, right? You can total up the costs of everything that you should be doing. You total up all the costs of the projected issues that may actually be a problem. And you can see if if it makes sense for you to institute these types of security awareness or security activities within your organization, right? And don't be ashamed if you come out and you say, well, you know what, it doesn't make a lot of sense for an organization to do this. It's a lot cheaper for us as an organization to be reactive rather than proactively trying to solve these problems. Okay? But if you do happen to make that decision, you're making that decision based off of numbers and evidence that you already have, and it's a conscious choice in order to do this. Okay? So in conclusion, all right, a lot of organizations are cheap, right? You know, going back to the original thing. They're not going to spend any money on something that isn't going to be provably what they want to be doing, okay? They're going to want to do this job on a very tight budget with as minimal cost, because it is going to be a cost, right? Finding an expert. If you want to do this in-house, you're going to want to find somebody that knows what they're doing and how to do it, okay? The problem with this is that there are very few people out there that understand this field to the point where you could leverage them to trust them with this level of knowledge and leadership within the organization. It's very tight to have them. They're very few in existence in the world. Okay? But what you can do also is you can train people internally to become more aware of these issues and dedicate them to becoming the security expert within the organization. They may not be expert level, but they may be good enough to be able to help the company and the organization reach to a point where it's good for them. Right? Educate the people with a clear vulnerability response process. Right? What you don't want is to be scrambling on a case of a fire and not have a process in place, not know who you need to contact. There's a lot of people out there within the organization that need to know this. Sales guys don't like getting caught flat-footed when a customer talks to them about a vulnerability that they don't know about. Okay, support doesn't like understanding a vulnerability. And so you just want to be able to have that process there. Okay. What activities can you go on? Again, this goes back to the overall cost-benefit analysis that you've done within the activities. If you find an activity that's cheap enough for you, it makes a lot of sense for you to integrate, that's an activity to integrate. Okay? Using guidelines that have already been established out there. I think GNU has a couple. OWASP has some information. A lot of other resources out there have good educational resources in order for you to leverage these guidelines. Okay? Do what the bad guys are doing. The bad guys are doing this on the cheap as well. So can you. All right? Fuzzing is a very good way to do this. Okay? Measure. If you understand what you're doing, you're tracking what you're doing, you can show the progress, understand where to go next, what's working, what's not, and how to fix it. Any questions?
Yeah. So we've only got a couple minutes, so I'm going to start out with a couple of questions of my own. First of all, how many people do you have at McAfee doing product security? So we actually have 6 people doing product security working under David, and that's per 1,500 developers. So for 1,500 developers across all of McAfee, 6 people doing product security, and we can demonstrate that we're doing a pretty good job. Most of those 6 people don't really do a lot of auditing. We do a lot of QA work. We do internal training. All the things we talked about here. We generally have about 2 full-time resources doing auditing at any given time. The cost per line of code, fully burdened. The numbers you were seeing up there are pretty close to accurate. It's certainly under 5 cents per line of code, whereas in a real consultancy that's going to come in and charge you, they do typically charge. The price is always going down, but $2.50 per line of code, particularly for a small project. It's certainly been more cost-effective for an organization that's going to audit code anyway. And all our external code audits, we still get them done, as David said, to gauge our own progress. But those we get for free. You should really be pushing. If a customer cares enough, most customers will actually foot the bill to have that happen. All right. Those were the things that came to mind for me. Is there anything else anybody wants to know? What's that? About last slide? Yeah. You said the first slide, right? No, this is the last slide. Okay. There you go. Oh, yeah. So these slides, we'll make them available. They're not current with what's on the CD. Go ahead.
When you were wrapping up, you said that one of the determining factors that you guys use is, I think, I was trying to get the exact numbers, how likely an attacker is to go after that vulnerability?
Right. So the question is. So the question is, how likely is an attacker to go after any particular vulnerability? Right. So.
It's here, or how do you guys determine that? Because that seems like that's a really subjective.
Right. So a couple of ways. First, if we can find it with the tools that an attacker is likely to use. So fuzzing is one of the most important things we do. Web scanning, if we had any web apps, would be something that we'd factor in there as well. And then when you're actually doing a code audit, which we do pretty extensively, we'll basically, that does become experience-based to figure out whether it's likely that fuzzing could possibly turn up that bug. And usually the answer is no. Otherwise, we would have found it during QA. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm wondering why you didn't use reduced product sales in that.
That's a very difficult metric to actually track.
Yeah.
Right? So
is a direct correlation between the announcement of security vulnerability and the stock price. Right?
Exactly.
So,
go ahead.
Yeah, I mean There's generally sales in an enterprise organization in particular tend to be very lumpy, right? I mean, there's never going to be any correlation to the vulnerability announcements and your sales. Generally, if a customer is unhappy with security, that shows up at renewal time, which is usually well down the line. So looking at the stock price is the only way that you might actually see some evidence of what the outside world really thinks about it, based on whether there's a immediate cause-effect relationship. It doesn't always mean there is a cause-effect relationship. A lot of times it's probably other external factors, but like the market was just down in general that day. It happens a lot, but it's the most quantifiable thing that anybody could show you right now. So that's one of the problems of factoring in brand damage to the whole problem. It's just it's very subjective, and the rest of it we can put numbers to, though.
Well, I would think that exit polling on why customers don't renew would
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
fairly reliable.
And we do win-loss reports, and I can guarantee you that so in product management, security has never come up for us in a win-loss. But that doesn't mean that customers don't get mad about that kind of thing, or make choices partially based on those kinds of things. It's too far after the fact to really be a good piece of data. So, go ahead.
So one challenge that I have in this process is so risk analysis has always been traditionally a combination of probability and impact to determine what the risk is. So when you go to an organization, you say, I've analyzed this risk and I'm dealing with the probability that something will happen is this and the impact is this.
Yeah.
The reality is, like you said, it's meaningless, right? Nothing's really going to happen. If I tell them they should patch this in 3 weeks because that's the probability that something will happen, it never really does happen. And you start losing political collateral at that point because the way you've been traditionally doing this risk analysis doesn't translate to the people who are waiting for this problem to happen.
Right.
And I'm not really sure how to.
Right. So the observation was that if you take the traditional risk management formula and try to factor in the probability of something happening, people just generally go like this in determining the probability, and they're almost always wrong, right? Because the probability is almost always zero for all of these things. And so I think that you want to be honest and upfront about that. And so the only things where there are significant probabilities attached to it are the things that are low-hanging fruit. And by that I mean your black box tools are going to be able to find them, right? And so the probability is still fairly low in any given month, right? It can take a while before somebody targets you, and that's going to be based on your brand. It's going to be based on the product and how prominent it is. So for instance, we prioritize internally what we look at based on how likely somebody is to go audit it, and honestly how likely somebody is to care if there's a security problem in that product. Like, if it's a product that only runs on some obscure operating system, and we have stuff like that, then we may not have looked at it, or we may not have spent much time on it. So I think that trying to apply the risk management formula isn't a really convincing way to sell this up unless your probabilities are all either zero or they're like 0.05 for the stuff that you could find in a black box manner, right? So the way that we like to look at the problem that works very well is to show what you're spending anyway. Whether you're doing it because you have some sort of processes or not, and show what you could get if you spend the same amount of money that's demonstrably more secure, right?
I think the only time you can actually play the probability game is if a new attack is becoming more and more popular, or if a new attack has been recently published and you're seeing more evidence of it out there. And you can say openly, this is new, this is fresh, this is what's out there, and that's what you tell your customer.
How do you manage what expectations? Knowledge retention. Oh, so how do you manage knowledge retention and training? Measure it. Okay, so you measure knowledge retention by quizzing people. You give them a quiz, and you give it to them after you give them the training. Pick a selection of the people, give them the quiz 3 months after they get trained. Give them the quiz a year after they get trained. You'll be pretty surprised what you see, particularly if you don't give them multiple choice questions. You give them short answers. Right. That's going to give you much better accuracy.
But if you build the technical training and you have actual evidence and real problems in there for them to go back and research and look so that they know where to look it up, that's your only way to combat that loss.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, thanks a lot for your time, everybody.